Captain Elias Ford looked out from the SSV Defiant's bridge. The stars outside did not care about the ship's shape. It was meant to be a shiny step into the galaxy for humans. Instead, it sat in the dock, ugly and patched up. "Is this really a warship?" Nolan, the chief engineer, asked. He stood next to Elias, looking at the ship with doubt. "It's more of a relic," Elias replied. He looked around the bridge. The controls blinked wildly. Wires hung out and dust covered everything. "Not every old thing tells a great story," Nolan said quietly. He wiped a hand over a console, cutting through the dust. His clipboard showed the ship's old plans. Elias touched the controls. "Let's see if there's a story here," he said. He pressed some buttons. The ship made a deep groaning sound. The lights flickered and then were steady. The bridge glowed with a harsh artificial light. Outside, small ships moved quickly by. Asteroids floated slowly. It all made the Defiant seem even less important. "We have 2 weeks to make this ship more than a joke," Elias said strongly. Nolan nodded and showed the engine checks on his pad. "Let's start with what's under all this dust," he suggested with a small smile. They walked deeper into the ship. With each step, they moved further into a vessel that the galaxy had forgotten. But Elias felt ready to meet this challenge. As they went down the halls, the bridge behind them came to life, quietly ready to share its secrets. In the quiet of space, the Defiant began to whisper about its past and maybe its future. As Captain Elias Ford and Nolan ventured deeper into the SSV Defiant, the dim corridors echoed their footsteps, revealing layers of neglect with each step. Their handlights swept over peeling panels and tangled wires that hissed softly as dormant systems stirred. Nolan paused, his beam settling on a sealed door marked Engineering Bay. With a nod from Elias, he punched in the override code. The door shuddered and then slid open with a reluctant groan, exposing the heart of the ship. They stepped inside, the air heavy with the tang of cold metal and the stale aftertaste of disuse. "This place smells like it's been sealed for a century," Elias commented, wrinkling his nose as they moved through the dense air. "You're not far off," Nolan replied, his voice low. He tapped his light against a large, dust-covered console. "These are the old Mark IV drives, antiques before we were even born." Elias approached the console, wiping a thick layer of dust off the screen. The static touch sparked slightly under his fingers, and the screen flickered to life, displaying fragmented data. "There's still life in her yet," he murmured, more to himself than to Nolan. They split up to survey the room. Elias traced the lines of the massive engines, his fingers brushing against cold, rough metal surfaces that absorbed the warmth of his touch. Nolan, meanwhile, examined the auxiliary systems, his light casting long shadows as he moved. The silence of the bay was broken only by their movements and the occasional crackle of reactivating electronics. Elias stopped at a terminal that still sported an intact interface. He connected his handheld device and began downloading logs and schematics, hoping they might reveal more about the ship's capabilities. "Look at this," Nolan called out from the other side of the room. He was standing by an open panel, examining something with his light. Elias joined him and saw that Nolan was holding a faded yet intricate circuit board. "It's a custom job," Nolan explained, turning the board in his hands. "Whoever did this knew their stuff. See here? These modifications aren't standard. They could be what we need to boost the old drive's performance." Elias studied the circuitry, the lines and patterns on the board weaving a complex story of innovation and desperation. "We might just turn this relic into a beast yet," he said, with a growing sense of excitement. Reinvigorated by their finds, they spent the next hours poring over every inch of the engineering bay. They uncovered more modified parts and a few handmade tools left behind by some long-gone engineer. Each item added a piece to the puzzle of the Defiant, a ship that was slowly revealing its hidden strengths. As they prepared to leave the bay, Elias took one last look around, his senses filled with the sharp scent of ionized air from the activated systems and the subtle vibrations of the ship coming slowly back to life under their care. "Let's get to work on these drives," he said. "We have a lot to do." Nolan nodded, his face lit by the flicker of ambition. "We'll make them remember the name SSV Defiant, he affirmed, stepping out into the corridor with Elias, their path lit not just by their lights but by the potential they had begun to unearth. Stepping out of the engineering bay, Elias and Nolan made their way to the ship's archive room, a small, seldom-used space tucked away beneath the crew quarters. The door squeaked open, revealing rows of ancient databanks and screens, their faces dusty and silent. Elias felt a chill as the air, cooler here, carried the faint whisper of secrets long buried. Nolan switched on the main console, and the room blinked hesitantly to life. The screens flickered, casting pale blue light that danced on their faces in ghostly swaths. Elias scanned the room, his eyes adjusting to the light, and approached a terminal. His fingers glided over the controls, awakening the archive system with a series of soft clicks. "Look for anything tied to the ship's commission or any classified projects," Elias instructed, his voice echoing slightly in the cramped space. As the old drives whirred, a musky scent of aged electronics filled the air, blending with the mildew scent that clung to the room's forgotten corners. Nolan's workstation emitted a low beep, signaling a successful access to the ship's service logs. "Got something," Nolan said, beckoning Elias over. The screen displayed a series of entries, cryptic and coded. "These logs aren't just maintenance records. They're coded, military grade." Elias leaned in, studying the text. The letters seemed to weave a tapestry of intrigue, hinting at shadowed corridors of power and forgotten wars. "Decipher what you can," he said, his curiosity piqued. "There's more to this ship than rusty panels and outdated tech." As Nolan set to work, Elias moved to another terminal, his hands deftly navigating the old interface. He stumbled upon a digital manifest that listed equipment and parts not standard for civilian vessels. Why would a supposed relic carry encrypted navigational gear? He pondered aloud. Nolan looked up, his eyes narrowing. "And why cloak it in layers of obfuscation?" he added, his voice tinged with suspicion. The plot thickened like the heavy air around them, laden with the gravity of their discovery. Hours slipped by as they delved deeper, uncovering more anomalies and inconsistencies. The ship's logs revealed brief mentions of a covert operation, Operation Starfall, buried within routine entries as if hiding in plain sight. "Starfall? That sounds more like a code name than a standard op," Elias mused, his gaze distant. "What were you really built for?" he asked the walls, as if the ship could answer. Their exploration was interrupted by the soft chime of Elias's communicator. He answered it, his face hardening as he listened. "Understood," he replied tersely, ending the call. He turned to Nolan with a steely look. "That was command. Our time just got cut short. Inspections have been moved up." Nolan's response was a nod, grim but resolute. "Then we prioritize. We find out everything about Starfall and get this ship into fighting shape before anyone gets wise." The weight of their task seemed to solidify, like the cold metal underfoot. Together they returned to their work, the archive room now a cave of flickering shadows and whispered possibilities. Every discovery a piece of the puzzle that was the SSV Defiant. Their journey into the ship's past had begun as a quest for answers, but with each unearthed secret, the stakes climbed higher, binding them ever closer to the mysterious vessel that was slowly revealing its true nature. In the dim light of the archive room, Elias and Nolan absorbed the gravity of their findings, their shadows merging with the darkness as they stepped out. The corridor outside felt oppressively narrow, the silence punctuated only by the distant echo of their footsteps. The ship seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the crew's next move. Nolan, his features tight with concentration, carried a stack of decrypted files under his arm, the papers rustling softly with each step. "This data could change everything," he muttered, more to the documents than to Elias. Elias nodded, his mind racing with strategies. "Let's assemble the senior crew. We need to share what we've found and decide our next steps." In the conference room, the air was thick with anticipation. Elias stood at the head of the table, his crew arrayed before him. The lighting was harsh, casting long shadows that seemed to slice the room into fragments. He cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the quiet. We've uncovered evidence of Operation Starfall, Elias began, his voice steady. This ship was not just a transport, it was central to a classified military strategy, details of which are still murky. The crew members exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the revelation settling over them like a cold blanket. Elias continued, "The Defiant might be more capable than any of us imagined, but with the inspection moved up, we're on a tight deadline to unlock her potential." A murmur ran through the room, a mix of anxiety and excitement. Marcus, the tactical officer, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What kind of capabilities are we talking about, and how can we test them without drawing attention?" Elias met his gaze. "We'll start with the basics. Nolan will lead a team to restore the main systems, using the old logs as a guide. I need another team to simulate battle scenarios based on the ship's original design specs." The meeting evolved into a flurry of activity. Crew members voiced concerns, proposed solutions, and debated potential pitfalls. Elias listened, guiding the discussion with a firm but open hand. The room buzzed with the collective energy of a team facing an enormous challenge, each voice adding to the symphony of planning. As the meeting drew to a close, Elias sensed a shift in the room. Doubt had given way to a cautious optimism, the crew's initial skepticism tempered by the thrill of the unknown. "We have our orders," Elias concluded, his voice resonant with newfound determination. "Let's get to work." The crew dispersed, leaving Elias and Nolan alone in the now silent conference room. Nolan approached Elias, his expression serious. "Are you sure about this, Captain? Pushing the Defiant this hard could either make her a legend or break her beyond repair." Elias turned to look at Nolan, his eyes reflecting the steel of the ship around them. "We don't have much choice," he replied softly. "If there's a chance this ship can stand its ground, we owe it to ourselves and to those who built her to find out." As they left the room, the ship seemed to respond, the air vibrating with the echo of distant machines awakening. Each step they took was a step towards uncovering the Defiant's secrets, the ship's corridors winding before them like the threads of fate they were now bound to follow. As Elias and Nolan paced towards the engineering deck, the ship's pulse seemed to quicken, reflecting the urgency of their mission. The dull throb of power coursing through restored conduits filled the space, an undercurrent to their determined strides. The walls, once silent and unyielding, now whispered of latent potential, the air tinged with the electric promise of revelation. Upon entering the engine room, they were greeted by the sharp tang of lubricant and the crisp scent of freshly soldered circuits. The crew, a precise ensemble of specialists handpicked by Nolan, worked in harmony. Sparks flew in graceful arcs from welding torches, casting a golden glow on intent faces. "Status report," Elias called out over the din of activity. Nolan, with a sheen of sweat on his brow from the heat of the engines, turned to his captain. "We're ahead of schedule. The main drive systems are coming online, and we've started testing the auxiliary power units." Elias nodded, his gaze sweeping across the bustling room. Each crew member was a cog in a larger machine, their movements deliberate and skilled. "And the weapon systems?" he asked, his voice cutting through the clatter. "Just getting to that now," Nolan replied, motioning towards a sealed compartment at the far end of the room. They walked over, the floor vibrating subtly beneath their feet, a sign of the engines slowly coming to life. At the compartment, Nolan keyed in a code, and the door slid open with a whisper. Inside, the space was dominated by a large, cylindrical device, its surface an intricate lattice of metal and crystal. It was unlike any conventional weapon system Elias had seen. "This is what the logs referred to as Project Nova," Nolan explained, his voice tinged with a mix of awe and uncertainty. "It doesn't match any known weapon tech in our databases." Elias stepped closer, his reflection warped in the cylindrical surface. "Have we tested it yet?" "Number, and we need to be careful. Its power readings are off the charts. We don't fully understand the technology or its origins." Nolan's usual composure was edged with caution. "Prepare for a controlled test. I want to know what we're dealing with. Elias decided, his decision resonating with the gravity of their discovery. As the team set up for the test, Elias stood back, his mind racing. The mystery of the Defiant was unraveling, but each answer unearthed new questions. What was Project Nova? Why had it been installed on an ostensibly decommissioned warship? Who had designed it? The testing began with a low rumble that felt more like a growl, the ship seeming to brace itself. A beam of light, pure and blinding, shot from the device, striking the reinforced testing barrier at the end of the room. The barrier glowed, absorbed the energy, and then, surprisingly, redistributed it in a dazzling display of light. The crew stood in silence, the implications of this technology dawning on them. It was not merely a weapon. It was a tool that could manipulate energy in unknown ways. "Record everything," Elias said quietly, his voice barely above the resonance of the fading light. "This changes everything." As the light dimmed, the room was left in a charged silence, every crew member aware that they were no longer just salvaging an old ship. They were peering into the abyss of forgotten technology, and the abyss was staring right back. In the aftermath of the test, the engine room of the SSV Defiant hummed with a new energy. The air was electric, charged with potential as the crew, wide-eyed and whispering, circled the device now known as Project Nova. Elias watched, his mind teeming with possibilities as Nolan and his team pored over the data streaming in from the sensors. "Remarkable," Nolan murmured, scrolling through the readouts on his tablet. "The energy output isn't just massive, it's controllable. We can direct it, shape it." Elias nodded, his focus sharpening. "Weaponize it," he said, not as a question but as a stark realization of their path forward. "We need to understand exactly how to control it. Nolan, set up simulations. I want scenarios for both defensive and offensive uses." The scent of ozone lingered in the air, a crisp reminder of the power they had just unleashed. The walls of the ship seemed to resonate with the latent force of the beam, a silent testament to the Defiant's hidden ferocity. As preparations for the simulations began, Elias left the engine room. His steps echoed in the narrow corridor, each echo a drumbeat propelling him forward. He entered the bridge, where the main view screen showed a vast expanse of stars. The tranquility of the scene belied the turmoil of his thoughts. "Captain, all decks report readiness for the simulation," the communications officer announced, his voice steady but tinged with the adrenaline that had gripped the entire crew. Elias acknowledged with a nod. "Begin," he commanded. The ship shuddered slightly as the simulation engaged. On the screen, digital enemies approached, their movements calculated and precise. Project Nova activated, the beam slicing through the virtual space with a precision that was almost balletic. It cut through the first target with a clean swipe, the image dissolving into pixels that faded like stardust. "Adjust the beam's focus," Elias instructed, his voice calm but authoritative. "I want to see its effect on a smaller, more agile target." Nolan adjusted the controls and the beam narrowed, becoming a sharp lance of light that pierced the next target with surgical accuracy. The room filled with soft, appreciative murmurs from the crew, their awe palpable. As the simulation concluded, Elias turned to the assembled officers. "This is more than a weapon. It's a deterrent. With this, the Defiant could hold its own against any fleet in the galaxy." The officers nodded, their expressions a mix of pride and the gravity of their newfound responsibility. Elias sensed their unity, the shared purpose that had fused them together stronger than any alloy. Yet, as he left the bridge, Elias's thoughts were clouded with strategic calculations. Project Nova could alter the course of conflicts yet unseen, but it also made the Defiant a target. Every great power brought peril, particularly from those who would seek to claim or destroy it. His last glance back at the view screen showed a universe unchanged by their discovery, its stars silent witnesses to human endeavor. Elias knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he also knew that the Defiant was no longer just a ship. It was a symbol of what humanity could achieve when pushed to the brink. Silence enveloped the room as he considered their next move. The universe was vast, its secrets as numerous as the stars. With Project Nova, they had unlocked just one. But as every Star Watcher knew, where there is one revelation, others lurk nearby, hidden in the dark, waiting to be discovered. Elias sipped his drink, the cool liquid sharp against his lips, and settled in to chart the course of their uncertain future. Elias sipped the last of his drink, the stark coolness of the liquid steadying his thoughts as he prepared for the next step. Rising from his chair, he paced his quarters, each step synchronized with the rhythmic thrum of the ship's restored systems, a ship that now felt more alive than ever. Early the next morning, Elias summoned his senior officers to the bridge. The first rays of a distant sun streamed through the viewport, casting long, angular shadows across the consoles and illuminating the faces of his crew with a soft, golden light. The mood was somber, yet charged with an underlying current of anticipation. "We're going to need allies," Elias began, his voice resonant against the gentle background hum of operational displays. "Project Nova gives us an edge, but it's not just about having the power, it's about knowing when and how to use it." The officers nodded, understanding the strategic implications. Elias pointed to the star map hovering above the holotable, its sectors pulsating with potential alliances and hidden threats. "We're here," he said, tapping a lightly populated sector on the map, "but we're not alone in understanding the stakes." His gaze swept the room, locking eyes with each officer. "We will initiate diplomatic talks with the neighboring systems. Their support could be crucial for what comes next. We need a united front, not just for defense, but to prevent the escalation into a conflict we may not recover from." Nolan stepped forward, his expression resolute. "I'll handle the technological demonstrations. Once they see what the Defiant can do, they'll be hard-pressed not to join us." Elias gave a curt nod. "Good. And let's keep the full capabilities of Project Nova under wraps. Show them enough to gain their trust, not enough to fear us." As the meeting adjourned, Elias lingered at the holotable. The sectors on the map seemed to pulse with a slower, more deliberate rhythm, like the calm before a storm. He turned his attention to the communications officer, Lieutenant Harrow, who was preparing the diplomatic channels. "Make sure those comms are secure, Lieutenant. We can't afford any leaks." "Yes, Captain. I'll encrypt all outgoing messages personally," Harrow replied, his fingers already dancing across the console with practiced ease. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Under the guise of routine maneuvers, the Defiant made its way to the agreed-upon rendezvous points. One by one, representatives from nearby systems came aboard, their eyes wide with curiosity and caution as they toured the ship. Each demonstration was a carefully choreographed ballet of technology and diplomacy, with Nolan subtly showcasing the Defiant's capabilities without revealing the full extent of its power. The guests left impressed but unaware of the true nature of Project Nova. At night, Elias stood alone on the bridge, watching the stars. The quiet was a sharp contrast to the day's bustling diplomacy. He thought about the delicate web of alliances they were weaving. Each thread pulled could stabilize or unravel the fragile peace they hoped to achieve. Somewhere out there, hidden among the stars, were those who would seek to challenge them. But for now, the Defiant sailed through the dark, a silent sentinel in the uncertain galaxy, its secrets locked deep within, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. As the last of the diplomatic guests departed, Elias stood on the observation deck of the SSV Defiant, watching the retreating ships disappear into the black void. The gentle whoosh of the ship's air filtration system filled the silence left in their wake, the sterile scent of recycled air mingling with the faint odor of machine oil that always seemed to permeate the lower decks. His mind was awash with thoughts of the coming days. The initial meetings had gone well, alliances were tenderly forming, but the true test of their efforts loomed on the horizon. "We've stirred the pot. Let's see who notices," he muttered to himself, the glass cool under his touch as he stared out into the cosmos. In the strategy room, Elias convened with his senior officers to assess their position. The holographic map in the center of the room displayed the sector, now dotted with markers representing potential allies and observations of suspicious activities near their borders. The light from the holomap cast a blue glow on their faces, creating shadows that seemed to flicker with each new data point that appeared. "We have movement in the Krillian sector," reported Lieutenant Harrow, pointing towards a cluster of blinking lights on the map. "Their fleet's been mobilized, likely a show of force in response to our diplomatic overtures." Elias's jaw tightened. "Or they're preparing to push back." He turned to his tactical officer, Marcus. "Increase our patrols in that area, but keep them discreet. If they're testing our resolve, let's show them we're vigilant." "Yes, Captain. I'll reroute our scouts now," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the undercurrent of tension. The meeting progressed with detailed discussions on logistics, supply routes, and contingency plans. Elias listened, interjecting with directives, each decision weaving a tighter web of preparedness around the Defiant. As the officers filed out, Nolan lingered behind, concern etching his features. "Elias, are we ready for what's coming? This ship is strong, but if we're pushed into a corner—" Elias met his gaze, the reflection of the holomap dancing in his eyes. "We'd do what we must, Nolan. We keep this ship and her crew safe and use every advantage we have. Project Nova is still our ace in the hole." Nolan nodded, the lines of worry on his brow softening slightly. "I'll make sure our systems are at peak performance. Whatever comes, we'll be ready." The corridors of the Defiant felt narrower as Elias walked back to the bridge, the ship alive with the low buzz of activity. Each crew member he passed nodded with a mixture of respect and resolve, their faces set with determination. The ship itself seemed to brace, the usual vibrations of travel now carrying a note of readiness. Upon reaching the bridge, Elias paused before the main viewport, a panorama of stars stretching into infinity before him. Somewhere out there, an unseen threat was coalescing in the dark, but the Defiant was no longer just a ship. It was a fortress, a beacon of human ingenuity and resolve, sailing forth into the unknown with its secrets tightly held and its cannons ready. The galaxy was watching, and so were they, the silent anticipation of space wrapping around them like a cold embrace, ready for whatever would come. Elias remained at the bridge's viewport, his gaze fixed on the unfolding cosmos. The distant nebulae painted swaths of nebulous color against the black, their serene swirls belying the tension that gripped the SSV Defiant. It was in this moment of relative calm that the communications officer broke the silence. "Captain, we're receiving a distress signal," announced Lieutenant Harrow, his voice slicing through the stillness like a knife. "It's faint, but it's there, originating from the Malden sector." Elias turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "On screen, Lieutenant. Let's see what we're dealing with." The main display flickered to life, revealing the static lace transmission of a civilian freighter. The audio crackled under the strain of interference, the captain's voice desperate but resolute. "Under attack by unknown forces, requesting immediate assistance. Coordinates attached." Elias straightened, his decision immediate. "Plot a course. Maximum speed. Harrow, respond to that signal. Tell them help is on the way." As the Defiant adjusted its trajectory, the crew sprang into action with practiced efficiency. The ship's engines thrummed more insistently beneath their feet, a palpable pulse that raced through the metal veins of the vessel. Elias felt the slight shiver of the deck, the taste of metal lingering in the air as he watched space stretch before them, the stars blurring into lines of light. The journey to the Malden sector was tense. The bridge bathed in the cool light of emergency panels, each officer's face a mask of concentration. Marcus monitored the tactical displays, his fingers dancing across the controls, adjusting shields and scanning for hostiles. "Approaching the coordinates, Captain," Marcus reported, his voice a low growl of focus. "Sensors are picking up debris. Looks like the freighter wasn't the only ship hit." Elias peered at the screen, where fragments of hull and twisted metal floated against the darkness, silent testament to the skirmish that had taken place. "Visual on the freighter?" "There," pointed out Harrow, directing the screen to zoom on a battered ship. its hull scarred and smoldering, but still intact. "Open a channel," commanded Elias, stepping closer to the communications panel. "This is Captain Ford of the SSV Defiant, responding to your distress call. What's your status?" The freighter's captain appeared on screen, relief evident in his weary expression. "Defiant, thank the stars. We've lost main power and life support is failing. We have wounded aboard." "We're coming to assist," Elias assured him. "Hold on." As the Defiant maneuvered alongside the damaged freighter, Elias coordinated the rescue operations. Teams were dispatched with medical supplies and repair kits, moving through the vacuum of space like specters against the starlight. With the survivors safely aboard and the freighter secured, Elias stood in the medical bay, watching as the Defiant's doctors tended to the injured. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the low murmur of soothing voices and the soft beeping of medical equipment. Returning to the bridge, Elias felt the weight of command settle upon him like the cold of deep space. The attack was no random act of piracy. It was a calculated move to draw them out. But why? And by whom? Staring out into the void, Elias knew their journey into mystery and danger was only just beginning. The Defiant, a silent guardian amid the stars, sailed forward, its secrets yet to be fully revealed, its crew ready for whatever lay ahead. After the successful rescue and stabilization of the freighter's crew, Elias Ford stood at the helm of the SSV Defiant, the soft glow of the navigation screens casting a pale light across his contemplative face. The stars outside the viewport stretched into the distance, each one a silent observer of the unfolding drama. "Captain, the sector analysis you requested is ready," reported Lieutenant Harrow, breaking the reflective silence. His voice carried a hint of urgency that matched the quickened pace of the crew around them. "Let's hear it," Elias replied, turning to face the main display where Harrow projected the recent surveillance data. The screen flickered to life, revealing a detailed map dotted with recent incidents of aggression, marked trade routes, and suspected pirate hideouts. "There's a pattern here that we can't ignore," Harrow continued, his finger tracing lines that connected the incidents. "All these attacks form a perimeter around the Narubi expanse, a region known for its unstable wormholes and minimal patrol routes." Elias leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the information. "It seems we've underestimated the strategic value of the Narubi expanse. Someone is very interested in keeping attention away from it." "Should we investigate?" Harrow asked, anticipation lacing his words. Elias paused, weighing the risk. "Prepare a scout team. We need eyes in that region without drawing too much attention." As the preparations for the covert mission got underway, Elias visited the engineering bay, where Nolan and his team were busy optimizing Project Nova for potential conflict. The air was thick with the scent of hot metal and electric sparks, a testament to their relentless work. "How are we looking, Nolan?" Elias asked, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. Nolan wiped the sweat from his brow and turned from the console where arrays of data streamed continuously. "We've enhanced the energy modulation capabilities, which should give us a more controlled deployment. It's ready for whatever you have planned next." Elias gave a curt nod, impressed yet solemn. "Good. Keep me updated on any further improvements." Leaving the engineering bay, Elias's thoughts turned to the crew of the Defiant. They were a resilient group, each member handpicked not only for their skills but for their ability to endure the unknown. He made his way to the mess hall, where off-duty crew members gathered. The clatter of dishes and murmur of conversations filled the room, a lively contrast to the tension that gripped them all. Sitting down with a few junior officers, Elias listened more than he spoke, their stories and laughter a brief respite from the weight of command. Yet his mind remained on the mission ahead, on the secrets hidden within the Narubi expanse. Later, standing alone in the observation deck, Elias gazed out at the swirling colors of a nearby nebula. It was beautiful but deceptive, much like their mission, cloaked in shadows and mystery, with dangers lurking unseen. As the Defiant slipped silently through space, heading toward the Narubi expanse, Elias felt the familiar mix of anticipation and dread. Whatever lay ahead, The answers they sought were woven into the dark fabric of the galaxy, hidden among stars and secrets, waiting to be uncovered. As the SSV Defiant approached the outskirts of the Narubi expanse, the void around them deepened into an almost tangible cloak of darkness. Stars that once speckled the vast black canvas thinned, leaving a gaping void that stretched ominously before them. Elias stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the forward scanners as they penetrated the expanse's murky depths. In the standoff's quiet suspense, Captain Elias Ford analyzed the situation with a precision born of years in command. The alien fleet, unmoving and silent, loomed like specters just beyond the effective range of the Defiant's sensors. Elias paced the bridge slowly, each step measured and resolute, as he considered his options under the dim glow of the tactical displays. "Options," Elias demanded succinctly, turning to face his tactical officer, Marcus, and his chief science officer, Dr. Liang. "I need realistic strategies, not guesses. What are our assets, and how can we leverage them without escalating this into a conflict?" Marcus responded first, his tone grave. "Their positioning suggests a defensive stance. If we inch closer, they'll likely interpret it as an aggressive move. However, our sensors have picked up weak points in their formation. If push comes to shove, we can focus our firepower there." Dr. Liang added, "I've been analyzing the transmission. It's not just language. It's coded with what could be cultural markers. We might use this to craft a message that speaks to their values, perhaps indicating our peaceful intentions more clearly." Elias nodded, processing the information. "Prepare the message, Doctor." Liang. "Marcus, keep our weapons systems on standby, but focus on defensive maneuvers. Let's not look like we're about to strike." The bridge crew worked swiftly, the air filled with the soft clicking of keys and the low murmur of hushed conversations as coordinates were plotted and potential responses prepared. Elias watched the alien fleet on the main screen, their ships a stark contrast against the velvety black of space. Within the hour, Dr. Liang had prepared a complex message incorporating elements of the aliens' presumed culture. Elias listened to the playback. Tones and clicks merged into a rhythmic pattern, an attempt to bridge cosmic distances with sound. "Send it across all channels," Elias instructed, his voice steady. "Let's see if they value communication as we do." The message was sent, and the crew waited in a silence that was almost palpable. Minutes ticked by, marked only by the soft whir of the ship's life support systems and the distant hum of circulating air. Finally, the alien fleet responded. Their ships shifted slightly, the movement subtle but unmistakable. A new series of sounds crackled through the Defiant speakers, different this time, less harsh, more melodic. "They're responding," Harrow whispered, his eyes wide. "It's a different tone, possibly acknowledging our message." "Keep the line open, continuous communication. Show them we're here to talk," Elias said, a cautious optimism threading his voice. As dialogue began, albeit slow and fraught with the complexity of interstellar linguistics, Elias convened his officers in the strategy room. "We've opened a channel. Now let's make sure it leads to understanding, not conflict," he stated, outlining the next phases of tactical diplomacy. "We keep our defenses up but weapons down. Let's solve this puzzle without a fight." Each officer nodded, understanding the delicate balance between safeguarding their ship and avoiding an intergalactic incident. As they returned to their posts, Elias lingered at the map, his finger tracing the stars around them, a reminder of the vast, uncharted possibilities that lay in every interaction, every decision. The Defiant remained steady in the void, its crew united under the banner of cautious hope, navigating the tense peace with a blend of strategic acumen and the universal hope for understanding. In the strategic room aboard the SSV Defiant, Captain Elias Ford and his senior officers were immersed in the nuanced dance of diplomacy and strategy. The alien response, while promising, opened a host of new considerations that required careful, precise handling. "Let's recap our position," Elias began, his voice resonating against the soft buzz of the room's ambient lighting. "Our communications have been acknowledged, but we're in unfamiliar territory. We need a robust strategy that safeguards the Defiant and fosters potential alliances. Dr. Liang, whose expertise had become invaluable, adjusted the data pad in his hands. Their messages suggest a civilization that respects strength, but also values tradition and protocol. We might consider a formal gesture of respect, something that aligns with their cultural parameters. Any suggestions on what that gesture might entail? Elias asked, intrigued by the approach. Possibly a ceremonial exchange of information or symbols. It's common among many cultures as a sign of goodwill, Dr. Liang proposed. Elias nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Marcus. And from a tactical standpoint? Marcus, who had been reviewing star maps and enemy configurations, looked up. We maintain a defensive posture but pull back slightly to signal that we're not escalating the situation. It shows strength without aggression, aligning with the diplomatic angle Liang is working on. Implement it, and keep our sensors at maximum. Any shift in their formation, I want to know immediately, Elias directed, the strategic fabric of their situation weaving tighter with each decision. As the crew executed these new orders, Elias stepped aside to confer with Nolan, who had been coordinating the ship's technical responses. How are we on internal systems? If this goes south, I need everything in top condition. Nolan's response was reassuring yet cautious. All systems operational. Project Nova is on standby, though I recommend a drill to keep the team sharp. Schedule it, Elias replied curtly, his mind already racing through potential scenarios. Over the next hours, the Defiant's movements were calculated and deliberate. The ship repositioned slightly, easing the tension in space like a slow exhale. Meanwhile, Dr. Liang prepared a digital packet of historical and scientific information from Earth, a symbolic gift to be offered to the alien commanders during their next communication. When the moment came, Elias stood before the communication panel, the packet ready to be transmitted. The alien ship, a sleek vessel that seemed to slice through the darkness, appeared on the main screen. This is Captain Ford of the SSV Defiant, Elias spoke clearly, his image being broadcasted across the void. In the spirit of mutual respect and understanding, we offer a gift of knowledge from our world to yours. The silence that followed was palpable, the crew barely breathing as they awaited a response. Finally, the alien commander appeared on screen, nodding solemnly, a gesture that was unmistakably one of acceptance. "Prepare to receive our transmission," the alien's voice crackled through the translator, the syntax awkward but comprehensible. Relief washed over Elias as he signaled Dr. Liang to send the packet. This small yet significant exchange marked a pivotal moment in their encounter, opening the door to a dialogue that could shape the future of interstellar relations. As the Defiant continued to orbit at a respectful distance, Elias watched the stars, now not just silent witnesses, but beacons of potential, guiding the ship through the uncharted waters of diplomacy and beyond. The diplomatic exchange had opened new avenues of communication between the SSV Defiant and the alien fleet, whose commanders now frequented the communication channels, exchanging information and cautious pleasantries. Captain Elias Ford watched these developments, a stern yet hopeful commander, aware that each peaceful day was another step away from potential catastrophe. In the strategy room, the atmosphere was a mix of relief and residual tension. Elias stood before his officers, his gaze sweeping across those who had followed him into the unknown. We've navigated through suspicion to dialogue, a testament not just to our might, but to our principles. Let's ensure this leads to lasting peace, not a pause before the storm. Lieutenant Harrow cleared his throat, breaking the brief silence that followed Elias's words. "Sir, if I may, the alien commanders have invited you to a formal meeting aboard their flagship. They wish to discuss a treaty." Elias nodded, the gravity of the moment settling upon his shoulders like a mantle. "Prepare a delegation. We'll show them that humanity stands for more than survival. We thrive on cooperation." As they approached the alien flagship, a massive structure that hung silent and imposing against the backdrop of stars, the crew of the Defiant readied themselves. Elias, in his dress uniform, stood at the airlock, waiting for the signal to board the alien vessel. The airlock hissed open, and Elias stepped into the alien ship, his boots echoing softly on the sleek metal floor. The corridor led to a vast chamber where the alien commanders awaited, their forms towering and enigmatic, yet their postures conveyed respect. "Captain Ford, welcome." The lead commander's voice resonated, translated into crisp English by the device at Elias's belt. "We are ready to forge a path that our descendants will walk in peace." Elias's response was firm, his voice carrying the weight of his ship's legacy. "As are we. The SSV Defiant was once deemed the galaxy's worst starship, yet it stands as proof that even the humblest beginnings can lead to greatness. Let this treaty reflect our shared values and aspirations." The dialogue that followed was charged with the potency of historical significance. Each word, each gesture was imbued with the hope of countless generations. As the treaty was signed, the chamber filled with a sound akin to a harmonious sigh, not of relief, but of shared resolve. Returning to the Defiant, Elias felt the shift not just aboard his ship, but across the expanse they now shared with new allies. As the stars bore witness, he addressed his crew, his voice echoing throughout the vessel. "Today we turned what was once a weapon of war into a beacon of peace. This ship, with all its quirks and shadows, has taught us that fear does not need to lead to conflict. Courage isn't just about facing what we fear, but about opening our hands in friendship." The crew erupted in subdued cheers, pride swelling in their chests as they looked out at the cosmos that was no longer just a battlefield, but a place of endless possibilities. Elias stood at the viewport, watching as the alien ships maneuvered into a formation that was no longer menacing, but protective. Humanity had not just survived, it had transcended, turning fear into respect and adversaries into allies. The Defiant, once a relic, was now a testament to humanity's enduring spirit, a symbol that in the vast, echoing cosmos, humanity would always find a way to shine. As the newly formed alliance's first light of cooperation dawned, Captain Elias Ford stood before his crew in the Defiant's assembly hall, the bulkheads echoing with the muted sounds of a ship at peace. The crew, gathered in their diversity, represented the best of humanity's spirit, resilient, innovative, and now diplomatic. Today marks not just a victory for the Defiant or even humanity, but for all civilizations seeking peace over destruction. Elias began, his voice resonant, carrying through the hall. "We've shown that what was once perceived as the weakest link, the most flawed vessel, can become the cornerstone of a new era." He paused, letting his words sink in, as images of their journey, the battles, the tense negotiations, and finally the signing of the treaty, played on screens behind him. The faces of his crew reflected the light from the displays, their eyes bright with the reflection of their shared trials and triumphs. "We set out aboard a ship that many mocked, a ship they gave away because they believed it had no value. But you, this crew, turned the galaxy's worst starship into its most unexpected peacemaker," Elias continued, his tone imbued with pride. From the crowd, a voice called out, "It's us who should be thanking you, Captain. You saw what no one else did. Not just a ship, but a symbol of what we could become." Elias smiled, acknowledging the comment with a nod. "It was all of you who proved that bravery comes in many forms. From the engineers who kept her flying against all odds to the diplomats who forged alliances where there were none, and every soul in between whose daily duties gave her life." The room filled with applause, not just for their achievements, but for the future they had all secured. Elias raised his hand, calling for quiet. "Let us move forward, not just as crew members aboard a ship, but as pioneers on the frontier of a new understanding. Let us be the Defiant, defiant in the face of adversity, defiant in our quest for peace." As the crew dispersed, returning to their posts or to moments of quiet reflection, Elias remained. He stepped toward the viewport, watching as stars streaked past, their light undimmed by the vastness of space. Beside him, Nolan joined, looking out at the expanse. "They used to say this ship was cursed, you know," Nolan remarked, a trace of humor in his voice. Seems she's proven them wrong. More than that, she's rewritten her own story, and ours, Elias replied, his gaze fixed on the infinite. Who knows what other stories are out there, waiting for us to turn the page? Outside, the Defiant sailed onward, her hull marked by battles fought and won, her bridge a beacon of command and decision, her engines a pulse of enduring strength. In the galaxy's tapestry, she was now indelibly woven, not as a footnote of failure but as a chapter of change. And across the cosmos, where countless eyes might watch and countless hearts wonder, the story of a ship and her crew would inspire songs of a starship reborn, a testament to the enduring human spirit that thrives on hope, strives for peace, and rises, always rises, defiantly from the ashes of doubt to the stars of destiny.